This is TWiT.
The rumor is it will have the Alex was right MagSafe adapter. Yes. The Andy was right HDMI port SD card slot port. The Leo was right no freaking touch bar. What were you right about, Rene?
Intel being just completely
no Intel. So we are all right.
Andy was right even earlier, and I want to see Ethernet back.
Oh, Ethernet.
It's going to be the power brick like the iMac.
And literally every single
Andy and I
time.
were right about the butterfly keyboard too. I might point out.
Exactly. No, from day one. Yeah, but they fixed that. At least they fixed that before they realized that. Okay, no, this is a crime against humanity. We're about to be dragged up before the front of the Hague if we don't fix this keyboard. Yeah.
You know, as we do, all these video things, you can tell. I can always tell where someone on the other side has gone Wi-Fi. So I'm always plugged into Ethernet, and every single time I plug an adapter into a computer for my Ethernet, I think of Andy. Andy was right.
What if it's in the power brick like the iMac, Alex? Would that be okay?
What?
I love the idea of Ethernet in the power brick. I love that idea.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be in the power brick like the iMac.
That would
you think so?
Amazing. Yeah.
Because then it's under the desk, it's on the floor, it's plugged in as it should be, and you don't unplug anything when you take the laptop. You just take off the MagSafe and you go.
That's great.
That's how it should be, because you're always plugged in. I mean, Ethernet port's next to the plug, basically.
What would be great is if it had the Ethernet and a USB-C, and then you have like a hub to it and everything else. You plug in your power, and you're like, I have all the things.
That would be interesting.
That's going to be a disaster with all the dust and dirt that you get on the floor. That's going to foul up that USB-C really quickly. But that's it. But that would be a great move forward, because Apple would suddenly be giving us that like $12, $15 dongle for free because they're getting.
That's a dock at that point, though. I mean, then you're giving us a dock.
Well, no, just
by the way, I should point out Microsoft does that, or did that in the original Surfaces. They had a USB port on the power supply.
But Andy knows that power brick's going to be $50 more expensive.
Probably also there was a rumor 14 and 16-inch, right? Roughly the same, both MacBook Pros with the Pro underline.
Yeah, the 13-inch would get the same treatment the 15-inch got in 2019, and just have the bezels Thanos snapped in half, so it'd fill more of the frame. Roughly the same size, but a bigger display.
The other rumor was that one of the reasons this wasn't available in the June is they're going to use mini LED displays, the same display they use on the iPad Pro, and it's difficult to produce in quantity, apparently. Does that make sense?
There was a tweet from an analyst who specializes in the panel industry, who said specifically that. Thank you very much. Who said specifically that this is basically a scaled-up version of the 12.9-inch iPad Pro display. I think he committed to mini LED. He was not willing to back a couple other rumors that were in the rear, but this is what he's committed to. If that's true, that's another point in favor of this being a really landmark MacBook Pro, because that is one stellar display after having used it for several months.
I'll be frank. Maybe I just don't have the good eyes, but I don't really see any big difference between the iPad Pro with mini
If you put
LED.
them side by side, you'll see it. Like if you put them side by side and you put on something that's high dynamic range, you'll see the blacks are much deeper. And 1600 nits, Leo, that could give you a tan.
But you have to put them side by side. It isn't always 1600 nits, only with the very brightest specular highlight kind of things. Yeah. I don't think it's in a day-to-day use. I don't. Maybe you would notice it, Alex, because you have to do color grading.
It's my job. That's what I do. Yeah. So I definitely notice HDR, but I have noticed now. I took some video recently of a sunset, and it looks so good on my iPhone. And then I sent it to somebody, and they opened up. They're like, it's all kind of blown out. I was like,
oh, you don't have HD. I'm so sorry.
But I think that's going to hit people more and more. Like you just notice how your photos and your video on your iPhone looks so much better on your iPhone or on your iPad than they do everywhere else, and you're like, okay, well, and you start noticing the TV now. I keep on thinking one of my TVs is still SDR, and I keep on looking at it going, what is wrong with this picture? And then I'm like, oh, it's just not HDR.
Well, there's also a rumor that Apple has secretly switched to 10-bit panels, which, like, they've been doing 10-bit internally for years, and they just temporally dither it to make it look like more colors than the 8-bit physical panels could produce. But one of the rumors in Ihnatko was that they're actually showing full 10-bit color now, and if that is propagating across their new panel lineup, that's like a lot of people, again, won't notice the difference. Some people don't see high frame rate. Some people don't notice high resolution. Some people could care less about, wide gamut, but some people do notice it. And when you're working on this stuff, like every day, editing every day, those little things just make it so much more accurate and so much a better experience for you. I'm really excited that this is like pushing the industry again, the way the iMac did when it went 5K.
And the hard part though is it's much harder. You know, like it's much harder to produce. Like I just finished, like literally last night in the middle of the night, I finished a 709 project, and Rec 709 is so cute. Like it's a cute little color space. Like I was like, this is so much easier than what I'm used to. You know, like I'm used to everything's all Vision or PQ or something like that. And so I was like, oh, this is just a little 709 project. I can just color correct it and call it a day.
But this is where Apple Apple limits our choice and makes things simpler, so to speak, where like I wound up with that advanced display because I wanted the 12.9 inch. I didn't want the 10 inch iPad. And so, well, congratulations. You're just paying for the best display you can possibly get. So, well, could you give me like the same display as the smaller one, but knock $150? Nope. Congratulations. You have the best display there is, which is completely appropriate when you're talking about a device that is positioned not for content consumption, but for people like me who I want the larger display because one of the things I like to do with it is photo editing and photo retouching, and so that's the arena in which you do appreciate the difference. It's not going to be the sort of thing where everybody is going to see the benefit, so that's why they have to be very, very judicious in where they put this panel.
Bloomberg, Mark Gurman last week said the new Mac Mini will feature the M1X or M2 with 8 high-performance cores, 2 efficiency cores. That seems like a reasonable prediction. Yep. 64 gigs of RAM at max, and will feature more Thunderbolt lanes. So, and this is probably, you could probably extrapolate that this would be what you would see in a 16-inch MacBook Pro as well, right? Like these will be similar designs, I would imagine.
They'll be the same chip.
Yeah.
And I think that it'll probably perform nearly as good as a base level Mac Pro.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. What about graphics processors?
The only thing is I mean, exactly, no dedicated GPU.
Yeah.
No discrete GPU.
I mean, we address this a lot with you, Alex, and I'd be very curious what you say after Monday, but it feels like Apple is still lagging behind what the top-of-the-line Radeons or NVIDIAs can do.
Yeah, maybe the top of the line, but for what most people need to use, we have to rethink when you have all those lanes that are all tied together with the CPU and the memory, there's just a lot more that you can do that you can't do through the buses. And so I think that Apple gains a lot. I don't think they're competing with Quadra cards, you know, but I think that they are competing with a lot of the game level stuff. And really, again, what 90% of the I think the Mac Pro will come out sometime next year, and it'll have places for you to put, unfortunately, AMD cards in it, not NVIDIA. So you'll be able to stack a bunch of cards into it, I think. But I think that for what you're buying the Mini for, the Mac Pros, everything else, I think you're ending up with an incredible amount of GPU speed. I just know that I'm doing 4 and 8K work on my Mini, and it's pretty quick. You know,
well, if I could add to that quickly, like if they have 32 and 64 gigabytes of RAM options and you're using unified memory, you now have a GPU that's being fed by 32 or 64 gigabytes of RAM, more or less. And that is unheard of, I think, when it comes to just GPUs in a laptop, never mind desktops.
And it's exchanging all that data back and forth is so much faster than the bus. So it really is a different... It's not, you know, and now where it falls down is people who are addressing those cards directly. So that's where it doesn't, you know, where it may not be as efficient. But for when you're writing for it, and specifically when you're writing to metal, you're going to be in a better position.
So you're going to buy 10?
I'm not going to. I'll probably buy a couple.
And just to add to that again. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say the new office hours already uses 5, and we already need another 5 to do what we're doing. And so we'll probably buy at least 3 to 5 of them. Yeah.
Renee?
I was just going to say, if you add to that, like Apple is increasingly moving off the big cores, which I think is smart because you're going to run into thermal envelope problems. Intel's run into them, AMD.
Even on a desktop.
Apple is running into them.
Even on a desktop.
Even on a desktop. But what they're doing, so they like we talked about this last week, the A15, it's a double cold core. It's Blizzard and Avalanche, and the cache, the whole thing runs much cooler, runs way more efficiently, and they're putting a lot of stuff off the big CPU block, like the big compute cores with dedicated accelerators like H.264, H.265, now ProRes. The audio stuff is all off the cores. And if they have a box that not only has unified memory for the CPU, the GPU, the neural engine, which they're doing a lot more stuff on now too.
Yeah.
But they have dedicated ProRes blocks, dedicated H.264 blocks, dedicated audio processor blocks.
What an SoC.
That thing is going to scream.
Holy
never
cow.
mind a GPU anymore. Like the whole idea of what a GPU did is being deprecated and spread all over a bunch of different.
You don't have discrete components.
Discrete
it's all in a SoC. Well, and is 64 gigs a unified memory? You think it can go that high?
Feeding the image processor, feeding the neural engine, feeding the ProRes encode decode blocks. Like it's a whole new way of thinking about computers.
This is exciting. Yeah.
I mean, and when you think
it's an afterburner in a laptop,
right?
And I think that by the time we get to the Mac Pro, we could be talking 128, 256. Those kinds of and all of that stuff's being totally accessible by the GPU and the CPU, or mostly accessible.
So really, what Monday will be is a day to kind of geek out on this platform, this new Apple Silicon platform, and what it can do, and that makes a lot of sense. I don't think you dilute it with AirPods or anything else. This is all about Apple Silicon and what it can do.
Yeah, the one thing that occurred to me right after Alex said it is that they came out with, back when they were talking about the A10 and the Fusion, the thing they said was their secret sauce was the performance controller. It was the thing that could choose which core to direct any particular task to. And then when they announced the neural engine, they announced the ML controller, which could figure out between the AMX units on the CPU, the GPU, and the neural engine where to send machine learning tasks. They've built this entire infrastructure to be incredibly scalable. So when you start adding like 64, 128 cores, that's all just being handled. Like there's no one has to write anything for that. It's like, this is the available compute we have for you. We'll handle the efficiency part. You just tell us what you want to do, and everything else is done. And that is an amazing idea, I think, when it comes to silicon architecture.
It's going to be a very expensive.
And I have to say, I was saying 64 or I was like 120 or 256 gigs of RAM, not processors, but that would be really great too.
But cores, yes.
Cores, that would be amazing.
Why not? Just why not?
It could. I mean, it could, and I think that
for the Mac Pro.
The big thing is that there's this process of, to do this really well, you need to be able to make the hardware, you need to be able to do the software, you need to be able to have the IDE, all the things that are, you have to have all of those things to get this to really work. And so that's the hard part that everyone else has, is that Apple's going to start running down the path with this, and it's really hard to do what they're doing if you don't have,
they have
an
a total
entire
monopoly.
vertical.
Well, so they got the whole thing.
So this is from a fairly well-known, fairly accurate, 75% accurate Twitter Apple leaker who says the MacBook Pro 14 and 16, mini LED displays, smaller bezels, no bottom logo, 1080p webcam, which I would love, even if it takes a camera bump, I don't care. Base models will be 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. The M1X will be the same base configuration for both models. Pricing will be similar between the models, and there will be a new charging brick.
Wow. Lots of information. 75% accurate. So a quarter of what you just heard is probably wrong. But which quarter? That's the question.
But this is always the fun time for rumors, because at some point, this is the point which they have to let in the losers, the Fredos of the family, where it's like, okay, we're holding this off because you are actually going to be responsible for unpacking these and putting them on display. Now we have to show you what this looks like. This is where, if you hear a rumor that breaks out like under a week, more credibility than say 6 months before.
Also, 120 hertz. Which is, I guess, not a surprise, right?
If it is, I can't believe it.
You're suspicious. Why would
I want it?
Yeah,
yeah.
Why would
it's nice for gaming, but I'm not.
Well, it's great for me because, like, right now you can manually toggle the MacBook Pro 16-inch between 48 hertz and 60 hertz, depending on whether you want to edit for TV or edit for film.
That's cool.
And it's great because it lets you do that. But if it just did it, like if I didn't have to even think about it, and I also want to be able to watch movies and TV shows at the proper frame rates, so it's just like a nicer experience.
Yeah. I mean,
yes, I'm that person. I'm sorry, Andy.
Yeah, one of the things is that at 120 frames per second, 24, 30, 60 all fit evenly.
Yes, it's just
you get 1-to-1 across all of those rather than some halfway between them. Also, there's a lot of phones that are shooting 120 frames a second.
Yeah.
It's a different experience. I just, when you're watching 120, not played back in slow motion, but played back at, and the thing is that when you watch a lot of 120 playing back at 120, it gets hard to watch other stuff. And this keeps on getting where Apple's pushing this experience down the path that is like when when you watch it, it starts to feel different, and you start to experience it. So you start mixing HDR and high frame rate and all those things, and it subtly feels different. Also, your mouse works a lot better. It really does. Like when you're at a high frame rate, it feels different. When you go back to like a lower frame rate, you're like, what happened to my mouse? So
it's showing that on the new Surface.
And we have to remember that a lot of things that people don't get, and I think Apple gets it better than most, is there's a lot of things that you don't notice, but you feel. And when you feel them, it's even more impactful sometimes because you're not conscious to it. You're just conscious to this feels a lot better, this feels more solid, this feels more real, and you don't notice it. It's just that when you go to something else, it feels chintzy. It's the little things like I've talked about in the past with Keynote. Keynote's better at anti-aliasing and better at kerning than the other presentation apps. And as a result, I can not always, but very often tell who's using PowerPoint and who's using Keynote just because of the way it looks. And PowerPoint has a cheaper look to it oftentimes. And Google's gotten better with slides, but it's super subtle, and it affects how people feel when they look at it.
What is our?
There's also like
go ahead.
The Surface, like they made the Surface 120 hertz, but based on the reviews, they didn't change the polling rate of the mouse, so it doesn't pull fast enough to take advantage of the 120 hertz. So it has the wrong, like it's skipping frames.
That's
basically.
fixable.
And that's the kind of thing I just want. Yeah. I just want them to
attention to detail.
Yes.
Apple doesn't have a problem with that in most cases. What is our advice as we get ready for Monday and I start to put money into my piggy bank on RAM? It's been observed that you don't, because of unified RAM and various other things, it doesn't seem to be you need as much RAM on a Apple Silicon Mac as you might have previously.
Yeah, I push back on that.
You think you need it? 16 gigs seems, 16 gigs is a nice starting point. That's probably adequate for most people.
Yes.
But should we buy more?
A lot of people bought the Mac at 8 gigs because a lot of people said, oh, unified memory 8 is the new 16, and it's not, because like it works great, but memory pressure is still memory pressure, and if you need a lot of things live at the same time, or you're doing something like a lot of layers, or like anything that requires simultaneous, you still need the actual physical memory. So like never skimp on memory. Like the best way I can recommend is unified memory makes that memory the best thing that it can be, but the GPU, the NPU, all of that is sharing that memory now still as well. So get the memory you need, or you won't have the experience that you want.
Who needs more? 32 gigs for video editors and Photoshop users and photographers?
Oh, like developers using many simultaneous like simulators, those sort of.
How about you, Alex? What is your minimum?
I have a lot of 8. I have mostly 8s actually, because I know what I'm using it for. So I'm using them for remote kits, and I'm using them to run things. And we tested them, and they're going to spend their whole life doing probably the same thing. And so I don't have, as a general purpose performance machine, I have a 16 gig that I use for that. And so but as a general I've been able to work in 8K video on an 8 gig. It just depends on what you're doing. 3D, photogrammetry, and things like motion in using I've been doing a lot of USDZ in motion, Apple's motion. It really likes more RAM.
How much? 32, 64?
Well, I'm working in 8K. So in 8K 3D in motion, 16 is a better choice.
Even 16 is enough. So I figure if they're starting at 16, they'll offer at least 32 as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Get 32, right?
I wouldn't be surprised if there was 64. I wouldn't be surprised if there was 64 megs.
Really?
Or gigs. I think that it really turns. I will say 64 gigs in a mini with an M1X would be a monster of a machine, like just a beast.
A Mac Pro, a little mini Mac Pro.
It really would. I mean, it would be absolutely.
If they want to really announce their presence with authority, that's what they'll do. Okay, at least with the Mac Mini.
Okay. Oh, this is gonna be an expensive week.